Now that we have finished this design, we have our client take a look in the mirror and approve it. We would have already have them sit up to approve as well. And we've taken a photograph that they can then initial and show that they have approved the design once we have both of the brows designed. At this point now we're going to move on to duplicating the brow on the other side, and for this we'll be using our caliper so that we have exact measurements.
Do you like the design?
I love it. Looks good.
Good. I'm going to duplicate.
Here is your caliper, and you're going to take a little bit of your China wax pencil on the edge of the back. Get enough on there, and you're going to measure from the middle line to your first vertical line. Bring that back over and slide up. Be sure you are measuring from the middle line. And if you have changed your points at all during the design, make sure that you're measuring from the new point. And then for point 3, just open that up wider, bring it over and bring it up. Now we have the exact measurements on the other side. We can put in our points as guidelines. So we see point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and then we're going to have our point 5 and our point 6. Point 5 and 6 are just guidelines to help us get the right thickness as well as to make it easier to draw that bottom line. Taking our thread, we go from 1 to 2, and again, it is so important you are right on those points that you made, the intersections of your vertical and horizontal lines. Even a 0.5 millimeter off will make a huge difference in symmetry. We can now go back to our first tail and go point 1 to 2, bring that straight up and intersect our middle line, which we have extended up onto the forehead. And if you feel that you have a line that isn't where you want it, please stop and change it. And now we can get that same intersection on the other side, and we'll know that we have the same angle on the tail of the brow.
Looking for these two empty spaces.
So now we're looking to make sure that the triangles are the same. And this is going to be so much easier then to get symmetry. You're going to be using a lot of geometry when you are brow mapping. Now we are taking our charcoal thread and putting in our lines, 1 to 2. And we did check the angle of the tail, so we do have that in line, but we're also again using the bone. So we're lifting our wax pencil right into that little hollow. Coming up underneath now to point 6 coming around to 0.5, and then we'll meet at 0.4. It's much easier to freehand the bottom of the brow. However, when you are first beginning, if it does help you on the tail or the front to use your thread, that is acceptable. So now you can see that we have drawn the second brow. We're going to clean up the line now. And so if you are correcting a line, you don't have to wipe your original line off. Otherwise, you're going to tend to put the same line in. Go ahead, correct it, and then take your Q-tip and clean away the excess. Work as cleanly as possible. You can see how fine these lines are.
Can you open your eyes for me?
Now we're checking symmetry.
I have to sit up.
Now we're checking our symmetry with our client sitting up, and this is particularly important when you have a more mature client, but you really want to do this with all of your clients. Some of them you will find have a very strong muscle pull on one side or the other, and with mature skin where there's less elasticity, you might find that one side does drop a bit more when they sit up. And of course, we really want it to be as symmetrical as possible when that client is upright. So you can go ahead and double check. You can go ahead and make any corrections at this point as well. Now we're just fine tuning the bottom line a little bit. And then we will have our client approve our final design.
Perfect.
Do take note that sometimes clients will raise one brow when they look in the mirror, so it's a good idea to try to have them relax the forehead if they do that. One final check, and then we will take a photograph and have our client sign that they have approved the final eyebrow design. We're checking all the points to make sure that they match. And now taking our photograph. Now we're just taking our little personal razor again and making sure that our line is nice and clean, that there is no hair outside of our design. We don't want to ideally remove much hair. However, the little peach fuzz that grows outside of the design can go, and it really will help you when you are doing your service to see the design. Now we're going to mark our design. We're using a waterproof eyeliner. It's the one that you have in your kits. And this is because the wax pencil will tend to come off easily during numbing, but also after we do our first mask. So it's good to have something that is a little bit more durable to mark that outline initially until you have microbladed your full outline. The last thing you want to do is lose your design after you've worked so hard to achieve symmetry. And you can see that she's putting in tiny dots. They are right on the line. Another reason you want to have your lines very fine. Stretch the skin and take your time with this. You can use a Sharpie, a fine tip Sharpie as well. However, we do discourage the surgical markers as they are very hard to remove and tend to really spread out on the skin. Now we have fully marked the brow. You can see how fine and exact that marking is. We gave it just a minute to dry, and now we're taking our primary number. We're going to put a nice thick amount at the beginning and roll that onto the brow. Make sure you are also getting the edge and beyond. We're not pressing down hard and spreading it. This is very light. Think of frosting a cake. And then if they do have good hair growth, you can take the point of your Q-tip and go backward and push that under the hair. Otherwise, it is quite easy for the number to just sit on the surface of the hair. Again, we're just gliding it over, covering the edge of the design and a little beyond, and then going backward to push it under the hair. You need to have enough of the number on that you can see it. We're going to take some of our cellophane now and cover it, which will enhance the speed that it numbs by 50%. Always be familiar with your numbing product, though some do not require the cellophane to numb quickly. We're going to leave this on now for 10 minutes, and you may have heard of microbladers that do not numb for the first pass, and that's perfectly acceptable. The more we numb, the harder it is to work on the skin. However, we do put a little bit of number on just to take the edge off. So 10 minutes is plenty. We don't want to leave it on longer than that. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our numbing agent. Again, we have had this on for 10 minutes. We're going to take a micro tip and just glide over the design in the direction we drew it so as to not disturb the outline. We can then go ahead and take a tissue, like a Kleenex, and just lightly blot over the top of that to remove any damp residue and then bring that off slowly. If you're careful, you really shouldn't have much movement of your design. However, if something has come off or has moved, please correct that before you start working. So if you're missing dots or anything like that, please be sure to put those back in. We also are going to be designing now with, choosing our color, I should say, for our design. And our client is about a Fitzpatrick 2.5 or so. And so we're going to use a medium light brown color, and we are going to be adding some gold to that. There's a little bit of pink in her cheeks, and we want to make sure that we don't have that brown come out too cool looking.
Spine.
Now we're going to mark the spine, which of course is the meeting point of the top and the bottom strokes. If you can't quite figure out where it is, it's where the hair starts to turn sideways and then grow down. What we're doing now is we are mixing our color and we're trying just a little bit of it on the skin. This will be implanted under the skin, of course. However, we can see how it develops on the skin if it's going to take on a funny undertone. We're now ready to open up our disposable blade. This is an 18U blade, and so it is shaped in a U. It is a 16 millimeter pin, so a nice fine pin. And as I mentioned earlier, these are so convenient because you have your handle, your blade, and your microfiber for masking all in one tool that can be disposed of. We have our pigment mixed up, and now we're going to do a 3-way stretch. Very important to have that skin stretched incredibly tight. And we're going to let our tool do the work. If you're seeing skin pushing way up ahead of your blade, you are not stretching tight enough. We have our pigment ring on the index finger of our non-working hand.
So for the front, we are going to
We're going to start on the front with some longer and shorter strokes and do a little bit of a wilder stroke, so to speak, in the front. She has a very beautiful natural brow variation of growth there, so we're going to follow that. We've taken a very small amount of pigment on one side of the blade. And we do our first stroke. And you can hear the skin crack.
and do double strokes right here.
So the front will be a combination of single and double strokes to give that beautiful fluffy look. And you can see the double strokes meet, they don't cross each other. Again, very tight stretch, you hear the Velcro sound.
Now we're in the long short.
And now we're going to do the long and short strokes. Now, in class, you have learned how to outline and then go back and put secondary strokes, and that's fine when you're beginning. This is really putting the two together and getting it all done at once. So our long strokes starts at the very bottom outline, and then the next stroke starts about 1 millimeter up from there. They're all flowing into the spine, and they're not straight like a picket fence, but they're not too curvy either. They've got a nice flow and they gradually lay down. So take note of the angle of the blade as it starts at the bottom, and it will gradually flatten out. Don't lose track of your stretch. When we get to the tail area, we want to lighten up our pressure just a bit. It's a very delicate area on everyone. And if we have too much pressure, our strokes will go too deep and then look very dark and very blue. Now we're going to go and fulfill the top of the brow, and we're going to again complete this all in our first pass. So we're making our first strokes coming off the outline and then going ahead and filling in with almost horizontal strokes. The goal is that the top and the bottom flow together at the spine. And they're not meeting tip to tip, they're flowing into the spine. So on the top, we haven't filled in 100% because you want to see where you're going. But as you get more experience, you'll be able to fill in more of that, of course, on your first pass because you will know where it should go. Now on the tail, again, we're lightening up our touch and we're beginning to do straight strokes that are diagonal toward the tip of the tail. These are not curling down. We don't really want any strokes on the top to be curling down. They should all point toward the tip of the tail. Now we're going to wipe the pigment just to see what kind of strokes we have.
I'll see the epidermal junction, pinpoint bleeding.
Ideally, what you'll have is just that little pinpoint bleeding, which means you have reached the dermal epidermal junction. So you're just cutting into the very, very top of the dermal area. If you're seeing a lot of bleeding or the strokes look dark, you are probably pushing and putting too much pressure. Now you can see already how nice those strokes look. If you can't see your strokes, you can always go ahead and apply a little secondary number, and that will bring them forward. You can pinch the brow lightly to bring any blood or serum up, and then go ahead and rub additional pigment in. And we are actually stretching and opening up those little cuts so that that pigment can get in.
So once it's already in, you see the colors.
And now while that one masks, we can go to the other brow and we'll repeat the same process. Remember to blot gently with your tissue. The goal is to not mess up your outline. And then please don't. It's very important when you're practicing at home and then when you begin to do services that you are sitting properly. For our client's right eye, we are sitting behind and we're pulling the blade toward ourselves. For their left eye, we're going to come around to the side, have them move closer to us on the table, and we're going to reach over and we can rest our arm on their chest, and we're going to be doing the blading away from us. Now, can you move other places? Absolutely, especially when you're doing the tail, but when you're first beginning, start to work this way because it does work the best for the majority of people.
I'm going to clean up this a little bit so that we can see both what we do.
Now the fronts need to match, so you can wipe a little bit of your pigment off of the very front before you do your second brow in the front so that you can see what the pattern looks like and design a similar pattern.
The strokes so beautiful.
I love
You see the
this.
double strokes?
Very, very fluffy looking, very natural, fits along with her natural growth pattern.
Okay.
Now we're beginning on the second eye, and it's important that we have that three-way stretch. So again, we're using both our working hand and our non-working hand to stretch. When you're practicing at home, please be practicing stretching. It's so important. And now we're going to do a combination of double strokes and single strokes in the front. And then on the bottom, we are going to do both our primary outline strokes and secondary at the same time, just as we did on the other eyebrow. Please listen to that little Velcro sound. You want to hear that. And we're always looking for a little pinpoint bleeding to make sure that we have reached that dermal epidermal junction. Now our strokes will begin to lay down as we reach the end of the spine, so make sure that when you place your blade at the outline that it is angled in the right direction. We don't want curly strokes that start straight up and down and then curl over. We want them to gradually lay down, just like they do naturally. And your last strokes will be right on your outline. And our long strokes start on the outline and our shorter strokes about 1 millimeter up above that. Now we're going to begin our upper strokes. And these start on the outline and then come off slightly, again not pointing downward but more diagonally or horizontally. And when we get to our tail, we're going to begin to do straight strokes. Again, they're starting on the outline but going straight down diagonally toward the tip of the eyebrow, and that completes our tail. Now we can wipe the pigment to make sure that we see our strokes clearly.
Into the epidermal junction again.
We can squeeze it a little bit to see if we get pinpoint bleeding if we haven't already. And you can see that we do, so we know we have it deep enough. You heard the Velcro sound, which is also a very good indicator. And now we're going ahead and applying pigment with the microfiber to mask. So this portion is called masking. Now we have completed the second brow. We're going to come back to the first and clean off our mask. We're using a wet wipe to do that. And we want to get all of that pigment off so we can see what we're left with. And then we are going to apply tag 45 as a secondary number. And we're doing that for a number of reasons. It will help bring forward the strokes, but also it does control bleeding if there is any. There isn't in this case, but occasionally there is. It is going to help with the comfort of our client. And it also does reduce any redness in the skin. So we're applying that over the brow, and tag 45 is a gel. Now we have gone ahead and wiped off the tag 45, and you'll notice there's a little bit of a white ring around the brow. That is from the secondary number because it does constrict the blood flow. So it does show that it is numb. We don't want to overuse our secondary number because it can dilute the pigment slightly, but this is just the perfect amount that we're looking for. Now we're going to go back and we're going to fill in any areas that need additional strokes, as well as we are going to make sure all of the strokes have even color. And those that don't, we will fill in with more color, not cutting additionally necessarily, but just filling them in with more pigment.
Beautiful.
Now that we have all of our strokes in place, we are going to go back and do what is called tracing. And we are filling the existing strokes with more pigment, but not cutting. So you're going to just stretch the skin, find the existing stroke, make sure you're in that stroke, and then just glide through it with the additional pigment. You're not putting any pressure, you're not cutting, you're simply going back and forth, laying down more pigment. Now, occasionally you might run into a spot where you maybe didn't get cut through completely the first time, and now you are, and that's fine. But for the most part, this is just filling in the existing work.
Okay. You can zoom in. over here.
We're going to begin our secondary strokes on the other eyebrow now. And keep in mind, if you cut well with your initial strokes, you will have less filling to do. However, it is important that there is enough pigment in each stroke, otherwise that stroke will disappear during the healing process. This takes time and experience, so in the beginning, don't be surprised to have to do more secondary cutting and filling. Once you get more experience, you will not have to do as much. So you can see Kay is filling, but not necessarily every single stroke because she already has enough pigment in them. When you begin practicing, you are probably going to be filling most of the strokes.
2 or 3 times.
2 or 3 times, and that is that tracing, going back and forth, finding that line. It's important not to be double stroking. So be very careful when you're doing this. If you have problems seeing, make sure to talk to us about magnifiers. We do sell them here.
Sometimes it just doesn't want to move and you just dab and it will open up.
And when you are filling the strokes, keep in mind you really only have about 10 minutes before that wound starts to close. So if you're working slow, go ahead and rub the pigment in the area that you worked, and then you can continue filling. Now we have completed our fill. We're wiping off the pigment, and if this were the end of the procedure, we would have left the final mask on for about 5 minutes to make sure and have that as saturated as possible. And we are going to go on to do a little bit of micro shading with these brows, but you can see how beautiful and complete the strokes look right now.
The first two is the double.
Yep, and so we've got double and single strokes. We have our outline as well as our fill-in strokes. And then, of course, the nice straight tail strokes. And you'll notice those strokes are a little bit darker than the natural hair. That's what we want. They need to be noticeable, otherwise you have not put in enough pigment.